Hello and welcome to the Premier League chat. Today we are joined by Glen Durrant and Scott Mitchell. Fellas, I think the best place to start is with the actual Premier League lineup itself. What are your thoughts?
Well, I might be going against the grain here in a sense that I think they've got the right 8. I was asked just before. I mean, there was a couple of games at Ali Pali. Chris Dobie was looking like the best player in the World Championships this year, and he had that incredible comeback from Rob Cross against him, which then made it a real 50-50 whether or not he was going to go to the Premier League. I thought Joe Cullen's game with Luke Humphries was a staggering match, and Joe Cullen comes to that game. We could be talking about him being world champion now. You know, I think Scott's going to talk a little bit about Peter Wright. I think he should be in, but I would sort of say I was in a similar situation. I went into the 2021 Premier League as the Premier League champion, but also as someone who was averaging low 80s. And I made a decision because financially, the Premier League is an unbelievable place to be. It started yesterday for the guys. They'll be doing an incredible amount of media, and you just want to be there. And my hope was that I was going to play myself into form. That's the question that Peter Wright will have to ask himself right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think if there was a question mark over anybody, it would be the Peter Wright inclusion. Not because of he's the most recognisable, one of the most recognisable dart players in the world. So, yes, he is going to put bottoms on seats. There's no two ways about that. But realistically, as we're just saying, is he actually in the form of his life? And you need to be in that Premier League. Otherwise, it gets on top of you. It can drag you down. It can make things work and worse. And like Glenn says, you know, it's not a nice place to be if you're not playing your best. And I think, you know, maybe Chris Dobie, maybe, you know, Joe Cullen could have been a good shout in there. But look, Peter's in there. Who's going to say no? Nobody. As Glenn just said, the financial reasons are there to have to say yes. And I think it's going to be a really interesting Premier League campaign because of it.
Scott, obviously you are a former world champion. How does it affect you as a player when you end up being a world champion and then you come up against people who probably believe they should be a world champion as well? Because you look at everyone in that Premier League lineup, you can imagine that basically everyone, probably even Luke Littler at this point, will be looking at the next world championship thinking they should be number one.
When you become a world champion, all of a sudden this target is on your back overnight, and it really is overnight. And what you experience is players now happy to go and take on the world champion, and they play you slightly differently. And that doesn't just happen in the Premier League 6 weeks later. That continues for years and years because they then go home and they can tell their people, their parents or whoever, oh, I've just beat Scott Mitchell. Everybody knows who you are. So that's the biggest thing that changes, and that changes something in your head as well, because you feel like you're hunted all the time. Whereas until you're a world champion, you're the hunter. You're hunting everybody else down. So, I mean, for Luke Humphries, he's going to feel like he's going to be hunted by 7 other players, and you know he's the target. He's got the target on his back, but he's playing so well, and if he can remove that from his mind, then I think he'll have a really good campaign.
And all you will hear is current champion of the world or former champion of the world at the Premier League. And I'm just, as Scott was talking to, I think there's only Nathan Aspinall and Luke Littler who'll go into this year's Premier League where they won't be classed as a world champion. But the Premier League's different. I used to get frustrated when I heard it as a glorified exhibition. Like I said, when you're in that bubble, the Premier League bubble, it is absolutely unbelievable. You can't walk down the streets in Cardiff this week. I mean, you get written documentation that you can't leave the hotel because just a massive amount of dart fans there. It's an incredible place to be, and irrespective of what you've got on your CV, they will just love the experience of playing them sensational arenas.
Obviously, Glenn, you have gone on to win the Premier League, so you've been through the entire experience from start to finish. How do you think that will affect someone like Luke Littler? Because obviously he also has to go to the Euro Tours, qualifications, Pro Tours. Obviously, it's a grueling process despite how enjoyable it is. How do you think it will affect him?
Yeah, I wear many caps these days, and number one, I'm a director for the PDPA now, so first and foremost I was thinking of safeguarding. I mean, 16-year-old when he got the call up, 17-year-old now, of course, and that has to be addressed by us, by the PDC, and I think we've done a really sterling job. He's got a good management that includes Nathan Aspinall, so a lot of the travelling can be done together. He's got an incredible family base who've been there since day one, even when I was on the BDO tour watching some of the JDC. His family were always around him. I've got no concerns. At 17-year-old, all I wanted to do was play darts. You know, he's got an incredible talent. My understanding is he's not a massive practicer. You can't get him off FIFA half the time. He's just an incredible talent. I think he'll be fine. The travelling takes its toll. That's why I'm a huge fan of longevity, the Michael van Gerwens, how they stay motivated, because I was pretty drained going into the second Premier League after only being there a year. So when you take all the factors in, he's there for a reason. It's the right reason. I think he'll be well looked after, and he's creating headlines on front pages and back pages.
Talk to me about how you go through each week and how you approach it. Do you approach it any differently than perhaps a normal, like a major, for example?
I remember Gary Anderson walking in, and I was on the biggest high ever. Aberdeen it was. I was playing Michael Smith. I couldn't believe I was there. Gary Anderson walked in. Are you ready for 17 weeks of this? And I only understood what he meant by that on the 17th week. Now, don't forget, I won it under different circumstances. You know, there was more people in the crowd here right now when I won it because it was in COVID. But I did get the experience of playing at 6 arenas. But it started yesterday. So you're doing, you know, from silly games on there for socials to speak to every newspaper, you know, it is massive and it's global now. Luke Little will be speaking to every broadcaster that's out there. You know, sometimes the darts is secondary. You're just building this brand of darts that we've got at the moment. So it's a unique situation. Hence the reason there's only the best 8 there. And, you know, they will love every second, but it's tough.
So obviously, we want to get your guys' actual predictions on the Premier League. So we'll go through from bottom to top. And then once we've got the 8 standings for the week, we'll obviously then go through each top 4 and essentially see if you believe whoever wins all the week process will also go on to win the whole thing. Because obviously we know you can win the weekly processes, but then get to the actual finals night and maybe even not get out of the semis, for example. So Scott, we'll start with you. Who do you think will finish bottom of the Premier League?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm going to have to say Peter Wright on form alone. You know, I think if he doesn't hit the ground running, we don't know what work he's been doing now that he's been picked. That's the thing. But I would say him because of just current form and compared to the other 7 that are in it.
Yeah, it feels like a very disrespectful way before a dart's even thrown as well. I would rather say, you know, I think the 4 semi-finalists, I mean, Cardiff this week, the bottom half is Michael van Gerwen versus Michael Smith and Luke Humphries versus Luke Littler. So week 1, I'm disregarding them 4. I'm going to look at the top section there, the Peter Wrights, the Nathan Aspinalls, and I'm going to actually, because it's in Cardiff as well, he's playing Rob Cross, which is which will be an extremely tough game anyway. But I'm going to go for Gerwin Price. I think Gerwin Price, Rob Cross to come through potentially that top section there, but I'm going to go for Gerwin Price. And for my 4 semi-finals, I can see 3 at the bottom. Michael van Gerwen looks as good as ever at the moment. Me and Scott were chatting yesterday, and he fancies Michael van Gerwen to win on Thursday. I expect him to be in the semi-finals. I expect Luke Humphries to be in the semi-finals. I think Gerwin Price will see an upturn in form. I'm not, you know, Luke Littler is always going to get it. But my little outside bet, which might surprise people, and I think this is the line I'm going to go down, just watch out for Michael Smith this year. I know he's putting the graft in again. He's getting used to these darts. It didn't work well in Bahrain. It didn't work well in Holland last week. I just have a real fancy for an upturn for Michael Smith in 24, and he may sneak into that top 4. I fear for Peter Wright. I fear for Nathan Aspinall. Rob Cross is a fighter. So it's a tough 4 before week 1. I'd rather go down the angle that I think Gerwin Price will win week 1 and Michael van Gerwen will get to the semi-finals.
If it's talk overall, who do you think gets into your top 4?
I'm going to go Michael van Gerwen, and I'm going to go Luke Humphries, Luke Littler, and I'm going to go for Gerwin Price just above Michael Smith. But I'd be proud and happy if Michael Smith bounces back because it'd be good to see.
What about yourself, Scott?
I feel exactly the same. I think it's going to be those 4. I think that MVG has been there, you know, done it and bought the T-shirt. It's like a regular thing now, the Premier League for him, and I think that he thrives on it. I think he somehow finds that drive to see it as part of a bigger thing. Whereas sometimes I'm sure you can get there on some weeks and think, you know, I've had a heavy week. Every time that Michael looks like that, he comes through it. I'm so impressed with him, and I can't explain to you as a dart player how I think it's amazing that he continues to reinvent himself time after time. Just when you think he's gone, back he comes, and I just can't see anything past his consistency over the amount of weeks him not being there at the end.
And overall, out of the 4 you both picked, who do you think lifts the trophy at the end?
For me, I still think it's MVG, me.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to stick my neck on the line and say the winner will be Luke Humphries.
Thank you, Glenn and Scott, for joining us. And we'll see how the predictions fare out later in the year.